The Orlando Magic are starting to get to the point in their rebuild where they've done the tanking that they needed to do. They've started to assemble the young core of players that they're going to be moving forward with. They've got their franchise guy in Paolo Banchero. They've got the recent draftees of Jet Howard and Anthony Black. Markelle Fultz is starting to have a career resurgence with them. Honestly, I could go on and up and down this roster and point out all of the young talent that they have at their disposal because it's a lot. Now, amidst all of the hype around Paolo last year, which, by the way, was completely warranted, Paolo is going to be fantastic, but throughout all of that, one player that really stood out to me on the Magic roster was Franz Wagner. Now, don't get me wrong, Paolo is going to be the guy on that team moving forward. He's likely going to be their best player heading into the future where they're trying to make the playoffs again and eventually contend for a championship. But strictly speaking, in terms of last year, Franz was their best player last year. Now, if you take a glance at the box score, you might be a little bit underwhelmed. His production wasn't anything jaw-dropping, but the thing about Franz Wagner is that he can basically do everything. So that's what I want to take a look at in this video. The fact that he's pretty much able to fill whatever role the Magic need him to fill and how he can basically do whatever they need him to do. And also his fit with Paolo and what that's going to kind of look like going forward. Now, as far as his efficiency on the offensive end goes, there's really not anything to dislike. He's nearly a 50% shooter from the field. He was a 36% three-point shooter overall. He's clocking about 66% at the rim, which for a 6'10" guy, you probably wish was a little bit higher, but it's nothing to worry about. That's still solid. And then he shot 41% from mid-range, which is pretty much league average, and I expect it to go up as time goes on. He also didn't take a ton of long mid-range shots last year. They were mostly short mid-range looks, which were floaters, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit later. But the big thing to take into consideration when looking at the statistical output from Franz last year is his role, because that's where things are a little bit interesting and you start putting those numbers in the context of what his role was, and everything starts to become a little bit clearer. If I had to actually define what Franz Wagner's role was, I would say he's kind of a jack of all trades, master of some. I think something important to note is that he can do a blend of the on-ball stuff as well as the off-ball stuff, which is perfect playing next to a guy like Paolo, who is most likely going to be predominantly an on-ball scorer throughout their tenure together. That being said, I think Franz spends a lot more time with the ball in his hands than people realize, and that's not a bad thing at all. Something interesting that I came across was looking at the guys who had at least 35 touches per game throughout the 2022-23 season that were in their second year. Franz had some of the best efficiency in terms of points per touch of those second-year players. And it's not like he was getting a ton of points per touch, but he didn't have that many touches per game. He was getting some of the most touches per game of any of these second-year guys, and he was still scoring per touch at a pretty high level. Now, I want to talk about some of the contexts in which Franz is best at scoring, whether it's on or off the ball. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you know something that I really harp on when I'm talking about forwards is being able to blend on and off ball scoring. I think that's something that's super important, being able to come off of off ball actions, get the ball, and then quickly react to the defense, make a decision, and either score or pass. Franz is a very good example of a guy who can do that. Now, I want to take a look at some different plays in which we can really see this. This is what's called a pistol comeback strong. There's a lot of different names for these plays. This is just what I'm going to be calling it for simplicity and because of what it involves. Mo Wagner screens for Fultz, and he then sets a comeback screen for Franz, and Fultz is going to pass it to Franz. Now, Franz and Mo are going to get into a pick and roll so that Franz can get by Osman and get to the rim. When he encounters Mobley while he's driving, he's going to go up with two hands, but once he gets Mobley in the air, he's going to maneuver to his left hand so that he can get around Mobley and avoid getting blocked. Now, this play right here is called a stack out. It's one of Orlando's favorite plays for Franz. It's very, very simple. Franz is going to get a pin down to get the ball on the weak side, and then he can get into the pick and roll. Now, the big thing to notice with a stack out is the fact that everybody is spaced out. In this situation, the play develops with Anthony's defender sinking in on the drive, and Giannis is going to be in drop coverage. Franz is going to take advantage of Mo getting Middleton caught up on the roll, and since Giannis is stuck in drop coverage, Franz is going to be able to just rise up for an easy floater without really any contest. Now, one cool thing about the stack out is that they have an option for a ghost stack if the defense is fronting on the pin down. You can see that they're preventing Franz from coming up and getting the ball off of the pin down. So since they're playing that so aggressively, he's just going to roll right to the basket and he's going to get a pass over top of the defense for an easy look at the rim. Now, they're going to run what's called a horns out here. Similar to the last play, it involves a cut from the elbow to get the ball on the wing, and everybody is just going to completely space out. You want as much space inside the arc as possible. And that's the big thing to note with these plays, is that anytime you can get Franz good space inside the arc, he's going to be able to most likely make something good happen in the half court. He gets a good head of steam going downhill at Şengün, who is notably a not very good defender, and he initiates contact with that shoulder to bump Şengün off his spot, and then he's going to angle more towards his left to get into some wide open space at the rim for the finish. On this play, they're going to run what's called a double drag. This is an early offense set, so it's not quite transition, but it's almost half transition, half court, if that makes any sense. The staggered screen is going to do a good job of forcing mismatches for the ball handler, and then it also is going to allow for the roller to create some chaos for the defense when they're actually rolling to the basket. Bamba's roll is going to get Şengün backtracking, and once Franz gets by Porter, he's pretty much left alone at the nail to get off the shot. Now, like I mentioned earlier, he can function both in on-ball rolls and off-ball rolls. Roughly 50% of his makes are assisted and roughly 50% are unassisted. So it's not like he's only able to score if it's being set up for him and served to him on a platter. He can create for himself if he needs to. He's going to be the screener for Paolo, and he rolls hard to make sure that Mobley stays with him, and he can create space for Paolo if he decides to drive. Paolo's able to get going towards the middle of the floor, and the spin move is going to force Mobley to come up and give attention to him. And Franz has been in the dunker spot, so he's able to just cut into some space once Paolo gets Mobley to bite, and then Paolo just dumps it off to him for an easy finish. This sideline out of bounds play, the Magic are going to run a delay action, and Franz sets this screen for Anthony to make a backdoor cut. But more importantly than just creating the cut, it's going to get Franz a switch onto Trae Young, and he's going to have no problem sealing him off so that he can get the feed in the middle from Wendell, and then he's going to punish the lack of rim protection for 2 easy points. The title of this video is Franz Wagner does literally everything, so how is his playmaking? That's another aspect of the offensive side of the ball that we got to talk about when looking at his overall game. One thing that I kind of touched on a little bit earlier is the fact that Franz makes really quick decisions with the ball. Chances are, if he gets the ball, he's either A, gonna pass it, B, drive, or C, wait for somebody to come set a screen for him, which is obviously, as we've seen, where he's very effective, assuming the rest of the team is spaced out around him. This is super important to his playmaking though, because the quicker that you're reacting to something when you get the ball, the less time the defense is gonna have to process whatever the offense is doing. You're just going to force them to have to decide as quickly as you did, and that can lead to advantages. It can lead to the defense making mistakes, and that's where his playmaking really shines. Those quick 1-second windows where the defense over focuses on him, that's where he's able to do a ton of damage to the defense before they have time to figure out what's going on. Regardless of how significant the advantage is that he created, it's still an advantage assuming he makes those quick decisions, which more often than not, that's what he's doing. Something important to point out is that a lot of the plays that we looked at earlier, where he's coming off of these off-ball actions and getting the ball and then creating for himself, he's not always just looking to score there. Oftentimes, he'll react to the defense and generate a shot for his teammates off of those same plays where he would otherwise be scoring. He's a very, very well-rounded offensive player. It's going to be tough to find him making a ton of mistakes on the offensive side of the ball, but almost equally as important when talking about a guy who basically does everything is how is he on the defensive end? A lot of the time when you're talking about a young team or a young player, defense is something that people kind of like to ignore because it can be an elephant in the room for a good amount of young players. So how is Franz holding up on that side of the ball? All signs point to the answer being, at the very, very worst, he's a good defender. I'm reluctant to call him an elite defender right now. I'm certainly not going to call him a bad defender or even just an average defender. He's a 6'10" mobile forward. He can defend multiple positions. Chances are, in most cases, that alone is going to make you at least an above average defender, or bare minimum average defender. But Franz definitely uses that stuff to his advantage. It's not like he has these tools and he's not using them like some players we see. When guys are facing up against him, they're certainly not going to have an easy time getting by him, and they're not going to have an easy time shooting over him because he's 6'10" with a 7-foot wingspan. Even against quicker guards, he does a pretty good job moving laterally to cut off their angles, even if they have an advantage in terms of just raw foot speed. Another way he helps mitigate speed disadvantages is by shading his matchup into help defenders, and this creates a lot of problems for whoever he's guarding. We can really see the versatility that I was talking about earlier in the defensive end. He can occasionally drop in the pick and roll, but he's also highly switchable. He can guard forwards, and he can definitely hold his own against guards. His defensive profile really fits perfectly with the modern era of versatility-focused defenses, and it also fits well with the size that Orlando has at their disposal on that end. All things considered, Franz Wagner does pretty much everything. In the modern NBA, it's not enough to just be good at one or two things. You have to be able to do a little bit of everything. You can't really get away with being a specialist anymore. You have to be able to dribble, you have to be able to shoot, you have to be able to defend, you have to be able to finish at the rim. Obviously, there are some exceptions. There are some players who are just so good at one thing that you can justify it, but I think those cases are becoming more and more rare, and in a lot of cases, they sometimes become liabilities. And that's why a guy like Franz Wagner is so valuable for Orlando. Whatever direction they decide to go in, however they decide to try and build around Paolo and him, Franz is going to be fine no matter what, because he fits regardless of what you decide to do. Now, I know a lot of people are kind of speculating if Orlando decides to try and make a playoff push next season. Honestly, if it weren't for the potential of Paolo and Franz, both individually and as a duo, I would say that's probably a little bit unrealistic and people would maybe be jumping the gun a little bit, but I see a world where this team is able to at least make the play-in tournament, and who knows, if things progress exceptionally well, they might be able to just get to the playoffs outright. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. The NBA offseason is finally almost over. We have like a month until opening night. I'm gonna have plenty of videos coming out from now until then to hold you over. But while you're here, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, all that fun stuff. It helps me out way more than you guys realize. So thank you so much to all of my supporters. It really does mean a lot. Thank you to my patrons as always. But thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one.